On the basis of what is known through existing and reliable historic records, it is not too difficult to reconstruct a probable real story of the life of Christ Jesus. The result from this reconstruction becomes the story of a remarkable man, who had lived at an extraordinary time and under extraordinary circumstances. What grand angel messages would have come to the aid of the woman named Mary, who became the mother of Jesus? Angels are God's impartations of ideas of truth. What were the divine truths that had motivated her? What she may have struggled with against worn-out opinions, with the support of angelic ideas? Two of the canonical Gospels say that Jesus was born in Palestine, by a virgin mother. This has become the standard perception of Christianity. It might indeed have been so, in a purely technical sense. It is certainly within the range of natural possibilities for a virgin mother to bear a child, although not in the manner that the canonical Gospels portray. The Gospels proclaim that Jesus was the personal Son of God, fathered directly by God Himself in an exclusively spiritual and incorporeal manner. This type of virgin birth is neither necessary nor divinely natural, and it doesn't make much sense from a religious standpoint either. Why would the divine mind set aside the wisely developed order of generation, the perfect product of the most profound divine wisdom? Would the divine wisdom suggest that for the sake of theatrical effects its grandest idea for the unfolding of life, that nothing can actually hinder, needs to be improved? What is perfect doesn't need to be improved. Is a superman with a super entrance needed, who would show humanity what humanity is not naturally capable of, but requires divine intervention? The assumed need for a superhuman being, an exception, a God incarnate in human form, would render humanity, the tallest of creation, inferior and impotent. One can hardly call this type of outcome the result of divine wisdom. The result fosters the conclusion that the creation story of Christ Jesus, as it is generally believed, is more likely fiction. Nevertheless, the highest unfolding on earth of the perfect man, an exemplar who would demonstrate to humanity what every human being inherently is, as a divine idea, and is naturally capable of, would likely have been born in an exceptional environment. In the divine universe, this exceptional environment would have been rich with the richest expression of universal love that can be achieved humanly, in which divine love is reflected to the fullest in universal loving. All nature is profoundly rich with universal love expressed. It unfolds into a symphony of love without limits. Divine love is reflected in love and humanity in the widest and fullest universal context, without barriers, exceptions, and timidity. A person, naturally born in this type of environment, would be more conditioned from the ground up to exemplify humanity's universal birth principle, the birth principle that he grew up with, to the fullest, which is the principle of universal love, and thus be able to express this principle in universal healing and in uplifting humanity, overruling all small-minded notions about God and the people themselves. Is it possible that this type of extremely high-level conception could have occurred within the natural human corporeal context, without miracles intervening? Most likely, extremely little was known in society 2,000 years ago about the human reproductive system and the female anatomy that is a part of it. The status of a woman as a virgin was likely judged, in those early days, by her vaginal skin cover, the hymen, being intact. The hymen covers the opening of a woman's vagina. It tends to rupture during vaginal intercourse. However, the hymen covers the opening to the vagina only partially. This means that an entry path into the vagina is always present, naturally. Furthermore, the natural opening widens as puberty unfolds. The natural opening offers a path through which semen can enter the vagina, and so on, without the hymen becoming ruptured to facilitate the process. Extensive non-vaginal sexual intercourse could result in conception the natural way. When semen is deposited onto a woman's vulva, possibly followed up with oral actions, that would push some of the semen past the hymen, into the vagina, from where it would become further propelled by orgasmic contractions past the cervix, all the way into the uterus, could lead to fertilization, without a woman's hymen being broken or damaged. The sperm that is contained in a man's semen remains fertile for up to 7 days. It is an amazingly intricate product that results from 130 days of development. It is designed as haploid. This means that its 23 chromosomes are able to join the 23 chromosomes of the female egg to form a diploid cell from which the new organism develops. Only a single sperm cell out of an average of 250 million sperm in a man's ejaculation is needed and is systemically allowed to successfully fertilize a female egg cell. This means that when extensive sex adventures are repeated often enough and the semen is rich, some sperm would penetrate into the vagina and pass the cervix all the way into the uterus, and so on, where it would meet an egg cell coming through one of the fallopian tubes. The chances for conception to occur by this indirect process are typically slim, of course, but under exceptional circumstances, especially with extensive and frequent intercourse, natural and direct insemination is possible. No miracle is required, therefore, for a human virgin birth to be happening. The entire human sexual system is designed to assure that insemination does happen. Since a female egg cell lives only for 24 hours from the point of ovulation, semen should ideally be present at this time. Since the sperm in the semen typically lives for up to 7 days, it should ideally be renewed every 3 days. The male sexual impulses are designed to facilitate this frequency. They are definitely not arbitrary. They are designed to facilitate the process. Just as the lining of the uterus that accepts a fertilized egg cell is replaced in the women's 28-day renewal cycle, the male seminal system appears to require a similar renewal via the ejaculation process. The seminal fluid has a complex chemical makeup of numerous minerals, hormones, and so on, produced by 3 separate glands. Ejaculation serves to flush out the system. The male-to-female interplay, which serves the process, also helps in return to advance the social bonding process, both physically and psychologically. Eroticism is an element built into the sexual interplay process. Erotic art typically expresses what already exists, built into the human system. The built-in element also has a physical component. Modern studies suggest that transmitted semen in sexual interplay acts as an antidepressant in women, and also has psychological effects as the result of its complex chemical makeup that includes several mood-altering hormones. These further increase the bonding effect. In short, we have an extremely intelligently designed system before us that not only assures procreation, but also aids the building of a social foundation in which the offspring is well supported and is able to flourish and create a rich and productive civilization. Sexual fantasies, which are also expressed in art, evidently also have a built-in foundation. The example shown here reflects what a modern study corroborates. In a survey of sexually active women, the large majority of the respondents stated that they prefer oral sex over vaginal sex, which evidently also applies to men. That the erotic component of human sexuality is not a modern fad, but is a part of the divine system of humanity that has been recognized so in distant ages, is evident in the numerous erotic sculptures that are found built into the temple walls of the temples of Khajuraho that were built 1,000 years before our time. The deeply intertwined human sexual, social, and also spiritual system is so well designed that no further improvement appears to be needed or be possible except for improvement of the recognition of it in society. Why then would God set aside this well-designed system for theatrical effects, and thereby go against the grain of already established perfection? Why would society inhibit itself with miracle fictions and move itself away from celebrating its divinely created, rich perfection that exists and has always existed? Indeed, why would God impose the virgin birth as a miracle that would set aside a perfect process that is divinely established? Why would God deny his own creation and thereby belittle man? This type of innermost denial is not divine. The opposite is divine. The recognition is divine, that was engraved in temple walls as a celebration of divine wisdom. If we go the opposite path, in denial of divine wisdom, great tragedies occur. When the unfolding of the divine design is squelched by false doctrines and false motivation, self-escalating tragedies often erupt, such as prostitution, rape, murder, war, genocide, even extinction. It was recognized in early Rome that one cannot build on this foundation. It appears that the rape of the noblewoman Lucretia, who committed suicide because of the rape, precipitated the overthrow of the Roman kingdom for the establishment of Rome as a republic in 509 BC. A small step forward had been won, which was soon lost again for the lack of further progress. In later times, the temple builders of Khajuraho in central India likewise acknowledged that one cannot go against the path of the divine design and build a civilization on it. In their understanding of the divine value of the human system in all its profound aspects, they went far out of their way to adorn their great temples with acknowledgments of the divine design. That includes the universal sexual dimension of it as an element to be celebrated in the temples. Why then would the divine wisdom impose a special miracle in Palestine, under the Roman Empire, that creates an isolating gap between God and man? Why would humanity deny the riches it has by not celebrating those riches and by celebrating unnatural miracles instead? For the lack of rational answer, one must assume that the miracle fiction, which fosters an isolating tragedy, didn't happen. The evidence suggests that an exceptional outpouring of universal love has happened instead, in which Jesus was conceived so that no special miracle was needed. The real supporting angels of the process were not esoteric then, but were men and women, responding to the imperatives of the harmonizing divine system that is bigger than all of us. By it, Mary became mother. Sexual emotions inspire sexual love that often spans across all the little barriers of culture, religion, and distance. At further advanced levels of development, sexual loving becomes spiritual loving on an ever wider platform without end. If one considers that Palestine was located at the center of several science-intensive cultures at the time, the Greek Platonic culture north of the Mediterranean, and the Egyptian culture south of it with the Great Library of Alexandria, and the Hebrew homeland with its spiritual culture located in the east, in Mesopotamia, it is not unreasonable to assume then that some daring freethinkers with advanced perceptions might have challenged the old doctrines of the priests. Some rebellious young adults might have snubbed their nose at the stuffy old priesthood that had historically stoned people to death for having unauthorized sex. The rebel pioneers might have acknowledged to themselves that all aspects of the divine creation are inherently good, valuable, enriching, and harmonizing, acknowledging thereby that God doesn't produce miscreations or defective aspects of creation that a special divine intervention sets aside for theatrical effects, especially not in the context of the unfolding of life. Some of the pioneers would likely have argued with the priests for spiritual freedom if they had seen the slightest chance that the established priesthood would listen. But who has ever won a fight for advanced perceptions in theological debates, where rigid doctrines rule, that are cast in stone? Those moving at the leading edge would likely have had to step outside the established circles. And this they had probably done. Where the priests said no to unauthorized sex, they might have said yes to each other. They might have seen sexual intimacy as a form of sacrament in their exploration of what God is and has created, a sacrament carried by the senses of the divine soul reflected in man. The pioneers probably rejected the starched religiosity of those who cannot comprehend the spiritual nature of being in all its aspects, who render the sacrament insoulless. The pioneers might have argued that the term sin is a term that applies to the forms of immoral tragedy that destroy civilization and tear all that is good onto the ground, such as with lust for money, with property and status, legal power, and even war, and so on. And they might have argued further that for this reason the term sin doesn't apply to the gentle bonds that unfold in love, and its expression, the unfolding of the reign of soul. The priesthood probably wouldn't have been able to see anywhere near so far, much less to see sexual aspects as aspects of love unfolding into expression. they would have seen the very opposite, as is it still mostly the case today. Thus, the pioneers probably wouldn't have bothered to argue their case before the priests. They more likely gathered privately in isolated places and argued their case before each other, the case for the sacrament with the divine soul, which is something that the established priesthood, which maintains its power with death threats and executions, would not be able to understand. In this context, it might have been that they're choosing to be honest with themselves and with God, and considering sex being the powerful impetus that it is, as a part of the unfolding of the dynamics of life, and the need for it for the natural reproductive process to function efficiently, the daring rebels at heart would likely have felt in their academy assembly with each other that they should give themselves the freedom of the soul, without official permission, to celebrate its sacrament. To celebrate their oneness and soul, their oneness with something that is so profound that it defies all knowledge, and which is so vital that no one would exist without it. They might have said to themselves within the context of spiritual exploration, I kiss the vulva as a divine element of life unfolding, and wake to know a world brighter with love reflected in loving. They would have celebrated sex as a part of the wide process of life, existing as a great spiritual complex of beauty and perfection that defies all rational understanding. Even we ourselves, in modern time, still haven't got a clue about what goes on in the intricate process in which a human being develops in a mother's womb. We have some vague theories, and even those are probably 95% incomplete. We have discovered some of the results, but we marvel at them and at how little we know about how the results are derived. The best answer we have developed to date is that the entire birth process is the product of an amazing, infinite intelligence with a perfection and quality in design that is way over our head. The daring pioneers in Mary's time evidently accepted their part in the divine process with soul-filled celebration of an element of God's reflection in their universe and man. Of course, their sexual intercourse had to be carried out in secrecy, as they lacked the legal authorization for it by the state or the temple. The pioneers might have said to each other, what we have touched upon here is bigger than us. Who cares about priestly laws? This is a blessing from God, from the divine. The divine reflection in us hints at something much bigger than us. Let's move forward with this and discover what lies beyond the realm which the senses can only hint at. Indeed, they would likely have done this in an ever-expanding manner on their chosen path of exploring the sense of soul. They evidently knew that they would get away with their physical and social pursuits in exploring the divine reflection in man, by simply making sure that in their exploration a woman's hymen would not be damaged by the unfolding intimacies. In their exuberance, powered by the resulting freer love for one another and for God, the circle of the Academy may have expanded to include a number of like-minded men and women searching for evidence of God in their life. And they would have found evidence that they actually couldn't ignore. They may have felt that it was safe to move with it and pursue their sacrament both individually and together as an academy, because technically, no matter where their explorations would take them, they would be safe from the law by simply assuring that a woman's hymen would remain intact, so that they would be able to prove before any judge that no unlawful act was done, as no woman's virginity had become violated. But oops, one day an unexpected pregnancy might have resulted. While they might have celebrated the discovery with joy over the promised new life, they would also have known that once the pregnancy was discovered outside the marriage bond, she would likely be dragged before the priest to be condemned to death for the evident violation of the law. However, with the woman in this case being able to prove her virginity, she would have turned the table on them and put the entire clergy into a quandary. How could this be if this wasn't from God? A virgin with a child? This has never happened before. It is not hard to imagine that twittering, an old wise man, an angel coming to the rescue, may have solved the quandary by citing ancient scripts about a Messiah that is to come. He may have said, the child that is promised to be born is he. Who else but God would have the power to inseminate a perfect virgin? This means that God alone is the Father. The old man may have winked to the woman, who would have understood that nothing contrary must ever be told. He may have counseled the woman to keep her joy to herself, and the child obscure to keep it safe once it is conceived, and above all to keep it out of the reach of the eyes of Rome. Would the old man counseling her have violated the law himself, thereby protecting a woman with a child conceived in sin? The wise old man would likely have recognized what the pioneers already knew, without having to ask it. He wouldn't need to ask, "What is sin?" Nor would he need to ask, "Is loving? And what results from it, sin?" He would have been aware of the spiritual academy that had been formed, and of the advances in spiritual perception it had accomplished. He might have been a frequent guest at the academy. He would have said to the priests if any one of them had dared to challenge the people of the academy, "Sin is when you steal from one another. Sin is lust for money, lust for power, and committing acts of fascism, murder, and war to fulfill your lusts, and to maintain your power. All this is sin." But this is not what happened among the academy people. Love has happened among them. Love is of God. The child that was conceived in the process was created by God, like any other child is. He would have pointed out that the process is so vastly intricate, complex, and harmonizing, that its principles are far beyond our comprehension. And he would have pointed out that in fact the process is all automated. It runs on its own. It is self-fulfilling. Our part in the process is so minuscule that it isn't worth a mention, and even this minuscule part is compelled to happen by a force that unfolds from love, and it's manifest in loving, so that the people and the woman with a child have touched the hem of love and have become one with it. Would you deny them? He would have said to the priests. If so, you would deny God. He probably wouldn't have had to make the speech if he had been a part of the priesthood himself. Evidently the pioneer's devotion to love, in which Christ Jesus was conceived, has established a more divinely human platform for humanity that would have had an elevating influence even then, which would be acknowledged in later times by Christ Jesus himself, and it would be seen again and again in future periods of Renaissance. The sacrament of the senses of soul, in which humanity discovers itself being one with God, has given rise to great works of art, in which the naked beauty of men and woman is not portrayed as profane, but is seen as being divine. Sex in art had continued in Renaissance culture for as long as the Renaissance spirit had continued. It was eventually crushed by the rise of fascism in the world, but the Spirit of God, reflected in the Spirit of good, continued on in the background. God was likely seen in the circle of the academy as the creative principle of man, in all aspects of existence, and the mind, that is the universe. They may have felt that as mind touches its idea, its creation, its image as man, the mind and idea is the divine one, that they endeavored to become one with themselves. They thereby became an unfolding singularity existing outside the limits of time and space, which have no place in God. In ancient time, women were revered as goddesses in honor of their fertility, the bearer of a process that even now, with all of our scientific knowledge, no one understands to any significant degree past the superficial. A kiss of the vulva may have been akin to a holy act. The pioneers in Palestine may have stood on similar ground, and so should we in respecting children. The children of the world should not be seen as personal creations by their parents, who routinely claim ownership. Instead, all the children in the world should be seen as the offspring of our humanity, as children of the dynamic complex of God and man being one. The children on earth should not only be seen as such universally, but be cherished and protected as such. This might have been recognized already at the birth of Christ Jesus. When the child Jesus was eventually born, it was likely seen by all as the product of our universal humanity, as a specific father could probably not be identified. As one might expect also, with a universal birth, a slew of problems would have arisen that soon would have had to be faced. The virgin birth of the child that was officially declared to be the Son of God would have inevitably become common knowledge round about. And so, as one might expect from Rome, it would have caused a crisis at the higher levels in the Roman occupation administration. With this background fast unfolding, the wise old man would have said to the circle of the academy, "Can you imagine the shock hitting Rome when the word comes to them that a Son of God has been born, that the divine being has become incarnate in the flesh, that a leader would arise from this in the future, who would challenge the God-King Emperor of Rome itself?" The wise old man would have therefore counseled the woman to flee Palestine, and to take the child with her, and not to stop until they would be out of the reach of Rome, and out of the reach of the priests, who would see the same threat. And he would have said to the others who were with the woman, "One of you must go with her." Since obviously no one here knows whose sperm has sanctified her ovum, one of you men must play the role of her husband. Society expects this. "I will go," the carpenter among them might have said. "I will teach the child my trade when he is old enough to learn." "I will also go with you," another man may have said to the woman. "I will protect you, and I will protect the child with all the strength that is in my arms." Still another man might have said to the woman, "I too will go with you, I will support you with my knowledge of the lands." A sixth person speaking up would have said, "I will be with you too. I will accompany you, and give you my knowledge of the foreign languages that you will encounter." In time it would have been decided among them that all members of the inner group would go with her, a company of 9, with the child among them being regarded as their most precious gem, the most precious they ever had. That those might have been the circumstances surrounding Jesus' birth is evident in his later theology. His birth in the academy might have inspired one of his most profound statements, "Call no man your father on earth, because one is your Father which is in heaven." He might have added that the concept of personal parentage is built on such a minuscule fringe event that it is not worth a mention, and that 99.999% of the process unfolds without anyone's volition by an imperative that is infinitely greater than any one of us, a process that is intelligent, harmonizing, perfect, spiritual in nature, and is in short the expression of divine principle, the creative expression of infinite spirit. And here Jesus might have added too, that the parent mind sustains its offspring, which may have laid the foundation for his healing work. He might have explained further that the spiritual process of sexual intimacy, the sacrament, that unfolds the senses of the soul, is a key element in the social dynamics that forges the necessary bonding between people as a foundation for the extended caring for one another by which the offspring's success is assured. Jesus might have also cited in his preaching to the masses the case of his defense of the adulterous woman that is illustrated in the 8th chapter of the book of John. The case is a case of attempted entrapment. While Jesus had been speaking in the temple, a group of Jews and Pharisees brought a woman before him, who stood accused by them of the crime of having committed unauthorized sexual intimacies. "Teacher," they said to him, "this woman was caught in the act of adultery, in the very act. Now, Moses' law commands us to murder her by throwing stones at her until she is dead. What about it?" In defending the woman, Christ Jesus defended his own history, and with it everyone's history, in the sacrament of the senses of the soul, that is powered by a higher imperative that no one can ignore, the imperative of love. We are told in essence that he looked the accusers in the eye and suggested that if there was one person among them who regards himself not to be a human being, who is not touched by the divine imperative of love and by the sacrament of soul, let him be the first to pick up a stone with which to kill the woman. As it was, no one did so that day. They all left the scene as though they had no case to prosecute. In fact, they probably left greatly relieved that Christ Jesus had rescued them from becoming murderers. He had saved the accusers from a pain worse than death. If they had done what they had intended, if they had taken up stones and thrown them at the woman to cause injuries, who had no means to defend herself against the pain and the rage-driven increasing showers of injuries until she would have died at their feet, the execution would have left a mental wound on the perpetrator's heart and soul that would likely not heal for as long as they lived, and torment them with greater agonies than they would have inflicted. Execution by stoning is a collective form of execution in which Theoretically, the burden of killing is shared in a manner that not a single person can be identified as the killer. In reality, all would feel the pain, and this by intention. The torturing tears into the soul. Stoning is a form of execution by torture. Death comes extremely slowly, agonizingly, and this evidently intentionally so when collective participation is implemented on this platform, which is demanded. The process of slowly torturing a person to death tears down the natural sense of humanity across society. It enables fascist control of it. The process of murdering by torture had evidently nothing to do with justice. It was required for political dominance. In order to maintain the dominance, a flow of victims is required to serve the desired objectives. The needed flow of victims is evidently easily assured by instigating sexual laws that are sure to be broken in a circumcised society in which the foundation for natural intimate relationships has been already wrecked. Jesus was evidently aware of all this, and had sensed that the accusers of the woman probably knew this too in their heart, and that they also knew that they had no case before God at all, which in fact rendered their case against the woman a case against God. He might have also realized that the perpetrators of the planned crime knew that the law of Moses had never demanded such atrocities as they claimed it did. In the German translation of the original Decalogue in Exodus 20, the verse interpreted as adultery merely states that one should not break the honorable bonds, the bonds that love has forged. Evidently it couldn't have been totally hidden from their hearts that this gentle directive stands in defense of love, which was later turned upside down in the book of Leviticus, the law written by the priests, for the use of the priests. There, in the book of Leviticus, and again in chapter 20, the Decalogue of Moses had all the gory stuff added that demands society to murder one another for a long list of decrees that were evidently forged to terrorize society and to soften it from within for the purpose of maintaining power over it. Evidently Jesus knew, as they probably all knew in their heart, that a society is not served by killing one another, but destroys itself in the process. Millions may have been killed in the mistaken orgies of religious murdering, spanning thousands of years. Jesus may have felt that the time had come for society to stand up for God and for the truth, and also for humanity, by putting the cases of insanity to rest, starting that day. He would likely have said to the accusers of the woman before him, "You hypocrites! Did you not read the law? Moses demands high on the list, do not kill. The stones that you would throw at this woman, you would throw at the heart of God. I cannot believe that you can be so insane that you intend this. You hypocrites! You should be on trial here, instead of this woman. How do you ignore the law of Moses? Moses demands, do not covet, do not steal. Every one of you tramples on this law. You have become masters of greed, each in his own way. As businessmen you float in a sea of stolen loot that you call profit. You give yourself incomes 1,000 times larger than you let your workers have. You have circumcised your humanity and exiled yourself from the presence of God as Adam had done. You hypocrites! Did you not discover in the law of Moses that it is an offense against God to speak untruthfully with intention? How many lies do you speak every day? You know that you are lying when you say to me that Moses demands that this woman be killed. You speak litigious lies that you know to be lies, which have been falsely attributed to Moses. You hypocrites! Did you not learn the real law of Moses regarding adultery, that the law demands that one should not break the bonds that love has forged? This means that you should honor such bonds as bonds of love that reflect divine love. Instead of honoring God in this manner, you come with eager eyes, wishing to throw stones at the love that reflects God. Why would you choose to live as hypocrites before God? Have you not learned from the law of Moses that the first and foremost demand on the law is that you love God with all your heart and soul, including in all aspects that reflect God and humanity? You are making a mockery of this law before me, before God, and before your children, and your children's children. Let them be your judges. Most likely this kind of speech would have cleared the floor with no one but him and the woman remaining. It appears that the priesthood in today's world, whoever they may be or may represent, as the guardians of public perception, isn't happy with Christ Jesus having rescued the woman, and the accusers as well. They may regard Jesus' defense of her as heresy against doctrine. It may have been for this reason for which the biblical account in which the story is told has been censored and removed from the Bible, by simply not printing it anymore. This is easily done. It has been done before. The entire chapter of Daniel 13 has been removed, evidently for this reason. It contains the once famous story of Susanna and the elders. In the story, Susanna is surprised while bathing in her garden, and is demanded there by two respective members of the community to consent to be raped by them. The story became famous, as it illustrated the high-ranking in society to be rapacious, pathetic liars, that all that is good in society stands defenseless against. The story unmasked what society was finally fast discovering for itself, and could identify with. Consequently, the story became a subject chosen by many artists who illustrated the struggle and deceit. In the story, the elders are all over her and threaten to accuse her of adultery if she refused. Since she was a self-respecting woman who could not consent to the imposed demands, she rebuffed them gently and stood her ground courageously. Being rebuffed, they made their threat come true. In the biblical story, Daniel saved Susanna from the ensuing death penalty. He did so by unmasking the elders' lies. The story must have hurt the noble rulers in the post-Renaissance period, who saw themselves threatened by it, because this story, too, is no longer printed. It may have been removed sometime after Rembrandt painted the story and made it famous during the 30 Years' War, in the year before the Treaty of Westphalia was enacted that ended the war and established a high-level platform for civilized living. That still stands today as a foundation for civilization. The Susanna story evidently stung the oligarchy at the heart. Consequently, it was removed. But there may be been also a deeper reason standing in the background for the banning of the story. The deeper reason may have been intentionally brought to light in one of the paintings of the story from this period. The painting seems to illustrate that it is not animal magnetism that motivates sexual intimacies, but that a larger universal impetus comes to light in the intimacies that span all ages and all times, an impetus that is demanded by the soul, or else it wouldn't exist. The human being is not an animal, but is a complex spiritual being with great capabilities for existing on created resources that require a large range of cooperative social intimacies and economic intimacies for the widely interlocked societies to function effectively. The sexual motivations of humanity are therefore evidently not personal, but systemically universal and developed by divine design to enable a high-level society with advanced technological and physical environments to exist securely, prosperously, and creatively. The painter presents a challenge to society in this painting, challenging it to recognize that by condemning its impulses for sexual intimacies, it is condemning its own divine design. Jesus may have referred to the Susanna story in his defense of the woman before him. She stood charged, like Susanna had been, with an accusation that amounted in fact to an accusation against God. In the Susanna story, the elders were condemned by their lies and executed by the law. Jesus would have pointed out that in the Susanna story the elders were unjustly condemned, because the real criminal in the case was society itself, its small-minded attitude, and its law based on that. Jesus would have challenged the woman's accusers to recognize that the impulses that unfold from love are designed into the human system by a greater intelligence than all of ours put together, and with an imperative that cannot actually be blocked. We may try to block them, he would likely have said, but these imperative impulses tend to break through in numerous ways, pushing against the barriers of the prohibiting laws of deemed morality that foster spiritual poverty, based on small-minded thinking. He might have said that an intelligent society does not fight against God's provision for humanity, but moves forward with him to fulfill the divine design. If you don't move in this direction, he would have warned, then you bring great tragedies upon you. Spiritual poverty invariably opens the hell gates to rape and war. Both are the same in essence. Rape is a hidden form of theft by desperate men, and war is an open form of theft by greed-consumed nations. Both rape and greed let loose are forms of murder. The murdering becomes endemic on both fronts simultaneously once you step into the arena of war. This means that the spiritual poverty that drives these fronts forward has to stop. It has to stop now. This is the poverty of Rome. Don't fall into the same trap. In Jesus' time the people backed off and walked away in shame. Maybe some walked away healed. If Jesus would speak to us in modern time, he would point out that his words had fallen onto sand and have dissipated. The proof lies in the tragedies of war, he would say to us today. Rape and war for stealing have become a concurrent tragedy. Both are still rooted in small-minded thinking and attitudes. In both rape and quest for war for stealing, the moral barriers become suspended. The protecting prohibitions become lifted. The spiritual nature of humanity is denied. It is trampled underfoot. The dynamics of spiritual intimacies break down. In the resulting desert of spiritual poverty, the outcome is often brutal rape and murder on a vast scale that soldiers historically are encouraged to commit for political effects, or get away with in war as easily as the elders of my time got away with, as the Susanna story has unmasked. In war, rape, even lies about rape to encourage war, are all too often monumental in numbers, brutal in execution, tearing the divine face of humanity to shreds in mindless fascism on a senseless path. The war statistics present such a horrid face of humanity that no one wants to acknowledge them. This, too, is reflected in the Susanna story. If Jesus had said this today, he would have been right on the mark. According to statistics presented by Wikipedia on war rape, as many as 80,000 women were raped by Japanese soldiers in the first 6 weeks of the occupation of China's capital city in 1938, that became known in the journals of war as the Nanking Massacre. In the same 6 weeks of utter madness, more than 200,000 Chinese people were murdered as captive prisoners, one person at a time. The example shown here is of a sports contest with a goal of killing more than 100 prisoners with a sword per contestant per inning. It may have been as a response to prevent the repeat of this insanity which prompted the Japanese military during World War II to acquire an estimated 200,000 Korean and Chinese women and girls for its military brothels to serve as captive rape victims for the soldiers. The victims were termed comfort women. These types of horrors perpetrated in times of war were perpetrated by numerous cultures with widely diverse backgrounds, as if brutality was a built-in feature of humanity. But as Jesus had illustrated, this isn't the case. Brutality is not the native face of universal humanity. The horrors are fringe events that are inspired by cultural destruction that has become intentionally imposed on society on a wide scale, which has not been resisted. A female Soviet war correspondent described a similar type of tragedy. She had witnessed the tragedy at the end of World War II in Germany. She wrote, "The Russian soldiers were raping every German female from 8 years of age to 80. It was an army of rapists." What the correspondent had seen was likewise not the natural face of humanity. It was the face of cultivated madness, a type of inner war with an inner destruction that is incurred when the spiritual dimension of humanity is denied for political goals. Another example of this type has occurred during the Bangladesh Liberation War by the Pakistani Army in 1971. There, an estimated 200,000 women were raped and up to 3 million people were murdered. Later in Europe, 20,000 Bosnian Muslim women were raped by Serb forces during the 3.5 years of the Bosnian War, in 1992 to 1995, in which 100,000 people were killed. In Africa, too, the rule of rape had its day. There, an estimated 500,000 women were raped during the 1994 Rwandan genocide, in which up to 1 million people were murdered, one person at a time, in a horrid killing spree lasting 100 days. The train of horrors continues to the present day. In the Second Congo War, or the Great War of Africa, as it is also called, from August 1998, a year after the First Congo War, till it ended in 2008, 5.5 million people were killed. Millions were displaced, and an estimated 200,000 women were raped. Worldwide, more than 240,000 cases of civil rape are reported annually, though typically only a small percentage of the occurring cases are ever reported. While the statistics are unreliable, and the political reason for the military raping has many backgrounds, one single thread can be discerned that ties all the widely dispersed horrors of inhumanity into one single face. This thread is empire. Wherever the tentacles of empire reached around the world, its dehumanizing culture becomes apparent. Another thread is also visible, which ties the entire worldwide system of empire itself into one consistent web. The thread, though thinly veiled, is the circumcision practice that precedes all empires in history, and is typically cultivated by them, both to advance and to maintain their dominance. This thread is slowly becoming rejected. Mass murder and war occurs when the inner spiritual raping in society is not combated. Mass murder becomes a form of the rape of war that opens the door to ever wider forms of such rape, that eventually opens the hell gate of mass genocide. And this happens right at the home gate. A huge mass genocide is now in progress that is already beyond comprehension. And even then, it is not an end in itself. We tend to speak softly now when we speak the word to population, as if the word is unspeakable. Genocide always bears such an ugly face that is too horrid to look at. This is evident in the case of the presently ongoing biofuels burning of food at a global rate of burning that consumes food resources that would normally nourish upwards to 400 million people. In a world that has 1 billion people living in chronic starvation, the type of massive food burning that is presently implemented adds up to the largest ever mass genocide by far, in which probably 100 million people are murdered worldwide with the sword of starvation each single year. This speeding train of horrors, if it is not stopped, will reach its final destination without fail, for which the stage is already set that no one can survive. The destructive force of 500,000 Hiroshimas let loose in the space of an hour will create conditions on Earth in which not a blade of grass can grow, much less food for 7 billion people. Extinction is the ultimate rape by intention. The swords have been honed for decades by now to assure the event of completion. That final hour begins without warning, and it ends as fast as the sword strikes. The prepared-for world crash extinction is a form of decapitation. One moment the world is bright and alive. The next moment it is no more. The result will be a great gaping silence in which not a single human voice will ever be heard. Some form of slow extinction caused by war may be already in progress. During the Afghanistan and Iraq wars, primarily the Iraq War starting in 2003, more than 5 million kilograms of uranium were vaporized in their use of penetration weapons. More than half of the vapor particles were smaller in size than the wavelength of light. The fine particles would float with the air currents and spread across the northern hemisphere. Of course, the uranium particles, no matter how small they are, which get into everything like the sand on the seashore, remain radioactive and affect bees as readily, or more readily, than they affect human beings. Uranium particles are powerful alpha emitters. They are extremely dangerous to biological systems at close distances. The result that was experienced after 3 years of war with uranium weapons, with which the northern hemisphere became densely polluted with radioactive poison, was that lung cancers have increased 6-fold in the USA, and likewise diabetes too, which has increased from 30 million cases worldwide to 230 million cases. Several other exotic diseases were erupting at the same time, like the bird flu and the Morgellons fiber disease. It was in this same time frame of the winter of 2006 to 2007 that the massive bee colony collapse disorder began. During this single winter, 875,000 bee colonies perished. And the dying is continuing. In some areas more than 90% of the beehives are lost, according to reports in 2012. With uranium having a half-life of 4.5 billion years, are we looking at the start of a slow extinction event? We may. This is serious, because when the bees die, and the pollinating insects with them, humanity will likely follow the same course not far behind, and die likewise. With large quantities of our food plants requiring pollination by insects, primarily by the bees, the dying of the bees may be a preview of our own dying from the effects of war, even though the wars have already stopped. When pollinating is richly proceeding, then the fruits do unfold abundantly, as on this elderberry bush. But when the pollination fails for whatever reason, the fruits are sparse. Are we looking at a slowly unfolding extinction event, with the dying of the bees and the diminishing flying insects? Has the modern war by society against one another, with their uranium use and weapons, become a war against itself that is slowly destroying the infrastructure for its existence? This is the face of the world when love fades out of sight. Ultimately, the train to the extinction destination is powered by a spiritual failure, by the global lack of a deep universal healing of the entire scene of humanity of its loss of universal love, encompassing the full range from sexual intimacies to national intimacies and onto universal spiritual intimacies, which together by design bind all humanity into one people, one human society, and one divine civilization. One example of the ongoing silent movement to heal the lack of love for all life, and for its widely interconnected purpose that extends into the smallest form of it, is evident in a recent work of art, in the form of a large carpet of bees. The work contains 17,500 images of bees, representing a third of a bee colony, printed on silk tissue, covered with beeswax. The artist illustrates the dynamics of life unfolding in the small, and in the love that is designed to nourish and protect it. The title of the art, Not by Chance Alone, speaks to me of a recognition that we live in a wider world of greater good, harmonized by a great universal principle, that is love, that we are invariably a part of, that we must protect, cherish, nurture, in which we find our own love, rather than to amputate it all with the horrors of war and indifference that we cannot really live with. The artist lists 55 fruits that the bees and pollinators service, which we otherwise wouldn't have. With war and indifference, we wage war against them, and against ourselves. Ironically, the trend has been that what society doesn't wish to see, it refuses to acknowledge. Thus, if the intention is to silence whatever truth is uncomfortable, then an excuse for the silencing is not hard to find, as it was found, for example, for purging the Bible of the story of Christ Jesus defending the adulterous woman. I have explored the path to extinction, and also the path to counter it, in my novel, Brighter Than the Sun. The trigger for nuclear war may not be pulled directly for this intention, but the intention for this to happen looms in the background, and is promoted from the highest levels of the policy circles, driven by a system that is carefully kept out of sight. The story of his defense of the woman was likely removed from the Bible. For this reason, the official excuse is that in one of the many early copied manuscripts of the Gospel in which the story normally appears, the story had been omitted, and in another copy a mark had been placed beside it. For this excuse, the book of John, chapter 8, now begins with verse 12 instead of verse 1 in the doctored Bibles. In the full version, where the story is included, we are told that after the woman's accusers had left the scene without condemning the woman, Christ Jesus had addressed the woman, who was still standing beside him, and counseled her to sin no more. Most likely, Jesus would have bowed to the woman first. He would have congratulated her courage to stand up for the principle of universal love against the greatest perils. For doing so then, and only then, he would have added, "Sin no more." "What are you saying with that, sin no more?" The woman would have countered him. "You said yourself that no sin has been committed." "I am saying with this in metaphor, be careful to keep the gold precious," Jesus would have replied. "Don't allow yourself to be raped, and above all, Don't be a rapist yourself and a murderer. I was able to defend you this time against the crime of offending God's law. Your sin lies in not protecting society against the rashes of its smallness and thinking. They would have killed you, and you would have been guilty for inciting this rage. You drew them into deep waters, while knowing full well that they are unable to swim, or in this case, become murderers. I don't say with this that you should keep your love small as they demand. I am saying that you must do it in ways that uplifts everyone. If love is not universal, it is not love and gains you nothing. Universal divine love is the great heart that inspires the unfolding of all that is good. Love designates the path to it, and it leads you on the way. This means that you must keep the gold of love precious in your sight. This may not be a simple task for you. However, I also know that you can do this. When you come to agree with me on this with all your heart and soul, then you qualify yourself to become a member of Mother's House, of the Academy, of the secret place where loving is natural, and safe, and productive, and beautiful. The woman would have likely countered Jesus, saying to him astonished, "You speak of lofty ideals. From where I stand, the world in which these high ideals apply no longer exists. What once was, is gone with the winds of time. The light is gone dim. We live in a circumcised world now, a world of mutilated men, where no one has a normal relationship anymore with anyone, at least not here." Jesus might have hushed her at this point. This kind of talking will get you killed for sure. You are speaking treason against the foundation of the priesthood that demands society's subservience. Hush. You are right, the world has deteriorated. Evidently, the kind of world in which your sort of talking would be safe hasn't existed for a long time, and won't exist for a long time to come. We may get it back sometime far in the future. But for now, hush. Hush, hush, and love. In a circumcised world, war is on the agenda. When the link to God and love is broken, the priests of war claim the world and kill those opposing them, including entire nations. Without universal love on the agenda, no one is safe. Both Jesus and the woman would have been right in their kind of speaking. The environment that is required for the implementation of the principle of universal love does not presently exist. It didn't exist then, nor does it exist now. We still live in a multiple, circumcised world in which the implementation of the principle of universal love on the home ground is so far out of place that it can only be explored as fiction fantasy. I have done this. The result is my series of 12 novels with a single story that I named The Lodging for the Rose. Nevertheless, in spite of the great, even impossible seeming challenges, the implementation of the principle of universal love is required for humanity to be able to meet the Ice Age challenge in the short space of 30 years that we may have still remaining of the current interglacial period before the sun goes into its mostly inactive phase. May my novel stand as a light in the jungle. Jesus would likely comment that under the principle of universal love, we begin to see ourselves as God sees us, and he would add that anything less won't do. Christ Jesus would suggest at this point in his conversation with the woman that they should go for a walk in the woods. There, they would be alone and be free to continue their evidently needed conversation in the free world where none other than the trees, birds, and the flowers in the meadows would be listening in, and where they would be surrounded by the unrelenting beauty of the divine creation, the creation of life. "Let me tell you a secret," he would say to the woman on the way. "The secret is that it wasn't I who defended you and saved your life. It was God who defended you." All justice comes from God, the standard of perfection. Justice comes from within. It comes from God, through man being one with God, universally and eternally. External justice is an impossible concept. God is the government of the universe. We pursue justice to see the glory of God. Justice never comes from the outside, he would add, not even from persons like me. "So it wasn't I who saved your life," he would say to the woman. "I played a part in the process, but this part was minuscule. My part was no bigger than the minute part the man had played of Mother's Academy, who had sanctified her ovum with his sperm, that had started the process in which I was born. The man's part in the birth process was so minuscule that no one could tell in retrospect who it was who played the part. The rest was all done by God unfolding as divine principle. The process is so perfect that the most unlikely fringe event suffice to get it triggered. This makes me the Son of God indeed, doesn't it? It makes everyone else so likewise. We are the Son of God and of divine love, at the same time. Of course, my amazing birth background in Mother's Spiritual Academy gave me the kind of flying start that one builds on enthusiastically and easily, readily, and moves with it. Mother's Spiritual Academy gave me the grandest start that one could have on the road to spiritual discovery. On this road that opened before me, many people and cultures have contributed their mostly dim concepts that our divine, human scientific capability has brought to light, as all aspects of our being one with the infinite God, in which everything, principle, and its idea, is one. In this unity justice is established, and all good for us and the world. Our unity with the divine is also our unity with one another. In the divine universe no one lives isolated and apart. We are bound as one in a vast network of strands of love that are the light of civilization. In this network that spreads boundlessly like a lateral lattice, no one exists above or below, with all reflecting the same spirit, the Spirit of God. In this lattice we meet one another's needs and thereby create the richest world that can ever be. This is the divine design that everything is subsumed to in the universe of life, that everything reflects. Beginning with our conception, to our reaching for the stars, for our joy, and for God's glory.